Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Poetry Salon cast and also the Poetry Salon on YouTube. I am here with the poet Niki Hurd. Niki Hurd is the author of the poetry collections The Stuff of Hollywood and The Language of Shedding Skin, as well as the chapbook Blank, 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 Don't You Weep. Am I saying that correctly?
Don't you weep. It's Don't You Weep.
Okay, great. I don't know why I have a blank, blank, blank there. That's probably
Yeah.
my typo.
There's a blank, but yeah, it's Don't You Weep.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So yes, so then it's not a typo. Oh, how nice that I didn't make a mistake. Okay. Niki is also has also co-edited with Meg Day, Laura Hershey on the life and work of an American master. Hurd's poetry, essays, and criticism appear in the Academy of American Poets, Poem a Day, Poetry Daily, New England Review, Salon, and This is the Honey, an anthology of contemporary Black poets, among other journals and anthologies. Her work has been supported by MacDowell, UCross, Breadloaf, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, the Newberry Library, and Cave Canem. Hurd has taught at the University of Houston and Washington University in St. Louis. She lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where she teaches at Franklin and Marshall College. I don't know how you have time to talk with me today, but I am so glad you are making the time. Thank you for being here, Niki Hurd.
Thank you for asking me, Tresha. Thank you.
Absolutely. And are you in Pennsylvania right now?
I am. Yes, yes, yes.
Great. So, yeah, let's just dive into it because 'cause I know you're quite busy and I am quite grateful you can spend some time with me. Um, the way that we usually do this is that I choose a poem that I want to talk to you about, and you choose a poem that you want to talk about. And I just realized the poem that you chose was also featured on Poetry Unbound. No, not Poetry Unbound. I'm sorry, The Slowdown. It was selected by Major Jackson. There, Poetry Unbound and The Slowdown are my two favorite poetry podcasts. So sorry, I confused the two of them. But if you
All right.
don't know them, listeners, please check out both of them. They're awesome in different ways. But Niki, let's start with the one that you're selecting. So when you're ready, please just give that a read.
Sure. So, the one that you're referring to, the poem that I'm about to read, is from The Stuff of Hollywood. It is a book that doesn't have any titles. And for this particular poem, like most of the poems in the book, I rely on third person, she, instead of I. When you have to kill everybody in the room, except no substitute is what he says, as he shows off his 26 guns, which don't include the one near the rack of ribs on the kitchen table, or the one making company with dust left in the gap between refrigerator and wall, or the one in the back of the nightstand drawer or underneath the seat of his custom-made F-350 parked outside on the asphalt street of a gun state. He wants her to hold each one, to know this assortment of candy, some made in the US, other formidable Russian semi-sweets. Were this a cowboy picture, he'd be the man to save the day, guns in hands, a backdrop of women, some he's loved, others waiting, fighting for attention. Married 11 years, together 20, he and wife. She looks at his bare ring finger, wonders how many times the wife has needed to retreat, like now, to the opposite wing of a house, eyes glued to a TV or scripture, praying or watching, whatever women do when their men like the taste of sugar. More a friend than family, she half jokes, asks if he's trying to do better. On screen, a coyote chases a roadrunner, and a window facing west frames an ever red sky.
Nikki heard everybody. Tell me please just about the genesis of that poem. Where did that come from?
Where did it come from? So, I had already started work writing what would be the stuff of Hollywood before this incident happened. So I was already writing about gun violence in America. At least that was what I thought um, the was the thesis of the book, if you will. And at that point, I had several poems written. I went to visit a relative. I won't say which relative this was, and I was really shocked. I wasn't surprised that the relative had guns. But I mean, he had like a lot of guns. And a lot of semi-automatic weapons. And I know he hunts. He's a fisher and he likes to hunt and those types of things, but it was just kind of like, wow. And if I didn't know him, I would have been scared. But oddly enough, I wasn't. And so I took pictures of the artillery. And I started thinking about the way I grew up and how I grew up with guns and how many people in my family were part of this thing that I'm kind of interrogating, this theme of violence. And so it only felt right to write about that experience, but also to kind of connect it with some of the things that he was going through, and see where it landed.
Yeah. Um, it's just so, I don't know, weird that we're meeting today because just this morning, like a couple hours ago, I went to breakfast and there was a cop there and like he's just sitting eating breakfast with his family, but he was right in front of me and I could see the gun in his holster. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, I had this visceral response going, that's a gun and it's just there. And what is it like to carry one on your hip, like right at your side? I mean, I hadn't really thought about just how big they are, but they don't slip in your pocket, you got to have like this whole special mechanism to keep it carried next to you because it's too big to fit in a pocket comfortably or anything. So, yeah, that's an interesting topic. I'm curious, you say you're interrogating this. Was at any point during writing on this topic, did you ever hold a gun? Have you held a gun? Have you ever gone shooting? Or tell me a little about that.
Oh, that's a really good question. I've held a gun a few times in my life, and I had a partner that once we went out in the middle of the desert and we did some practice shooting of some soda cans. So I had, and I don't, I think I had a shotgun. I think that was a shotgun. Ah, you know, I don't really remember. It's not something that I felt like, oh, I want to do this again necessarily. Though I have had times much more recently where I thought, well, maybe I should, you know, go and learn how to use a gun
Mm,
and practice shooting. And the relative, that this poem was kind of the impetus for, offered to, like, I'll take you out if you want to shoot, like, an AR-15.
mm,
And I just thought to myself, and I have once, I have to say, I've held it once because an AR-15 when I don't remember where I was, somewhere in DC, and a friend was like, "Oh, yeah, I know you're writing about this. Check out this place." And they handed me this AR-15, and I held it really quickly, and I passed it quickly back over. Like there was something about the energy that I just didn't want to hold. But
mm,
I definitely didn't want it to seem like I'm not I can't say that I'm anti-gun,
Hmm.
But I'm definitely not, why do we need these types of guns,
Yeah, yeah,
the, the guns that are used for warfare and things of that sort. Why are they necessary?
yeah, absolutely. Well, and tell me about this poem, um, and the process of writing it. Are you one who likes to use prompts, or are you someone who just sits down and kind of what they call pants it, just flying by the seat of your pants? Tell me a little bit about your writing process, generally speaking.
Generally speaking, I'd say much of my work has been based off experience. And so
Mhm.
my work is often the impetus is something that has happened to me or happened to someone else. And it's the impetus for a poem.
Mm.
But it doesn't mean that the poem is factual, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so there's two different things. It's not like, oh, this poem I just read, it's not like everything in it is fact. But it was drawn from a real experience. Um, I don't use writing prompts so much, though I'm working on a poem now that a colleague gave his students a writing prompt, and I decided to do it. And so I'm
Mm,
working on this prose poem um, from that writing prompt. But typically, right now, I think so. It's fair to say that I'm really drawn from what's going on in the world, and
mhm.
that really where I get my ideas from. Um, so yeah, I guess that's how I would answer that question. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really curious. You say, you're drawing from real life, but that doesn't mean everything's true. I mean, I think we're
Right.
always needing to say that in poems, and remind people that, yeah, not everything here is going to stand up in court if you ask me about it, like on a witness stand. Some of this might be open to interpretation. So I'll leave off. I won't press you on which relative this is, or anything like
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
Um, yeah, but one thing I've noticed, I mean, in this poem and the poem that I selected that I want to ask you more about, you're writing longer pieces, and uh, I would say they're kind of narrative, because there's a certain order to them, and I'm just curious with you, like, what what is it that drew you to poetry specifically, as opposed to like essays and longer stories? I mean, that's something I'm really fascinated about, because I think I've talked to so many poets, and so many of them say things like, well, I wanted to be a musician or a playwright or a this or that or the other thing, and then poetry chose me. So would you say, would you say poetry chose you? And if so, why?
100%. Poetry definitely chose me. I really wanted to be in film. At early on when I was young, I wanted to be an actress. And then as I got older, I thought, well, that's probably going to be hard for me to do. So, maybe I could direct. And so that's really what I wanted to do. And I just didn't have, I mean, there's no like sad sob story about it. I just wasn't in the right place in terms of my mind and commitment to it. Um,
Yeah.
and um, and I don't have any regrets about that, which I'm grateful for. Um,
Hmm.
but the true story is that my grandmother died, and I was in Arizona, and some little voice said, you need to write." And I sat down in response to her death and wrote a poem. And prior to that, I had never been interested in poetry. I had gone through high school reading Whitman and Eliot and Dickinson, and I was just kind of like completely not interested. But I
Mm.
wrote this poem to respond to my grandmother's death. I was really, really close to my grandmother. And then shortly thereafter, there was a coffee shop in town near the University of Arizona. And I walked in to get coffee, and there was a woman reading poetry midday, and I was completely speechless.
Mm.
And that poet was the poet Ruth Foreman, who would end up becoming my teacher. And I remember standing, listening to her and thinking, oh my God, I want to do that. And so it was almost as if it was the first time I had heard poetry. Um,
Mm.
I think it was just the language that she was using. I didn't know that you could use Black vernacular, and it be considered poetic. And so that's really what pushed me in that direction.
I want to ask for clarity. So the woman reading poetry was Ruth Foreman, or the woman was reading a book of poetry by Ruth Foreman?
No, the woman reading was Ruth Foreman,
Oh, wow.
who's from originally from California. So yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, and I'm very forthright. I'm not gonna pretend that I know things I don't know. But there's so many great poets, and she's not one I've encountered yet, which doesn't mean anything.
Right, right.
There's so many great poets out there writing and publishing today, and geez, I'm never feeling like I really understand what's going on because someone's always mentioning someone who's really well known, and I don't know who they are. So can you say a little bit more about what got you about Ruth Foreman? You said it was using the Black vernacular, but did you have like a favorite poem of hers that really pulled you in?
Oh, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but she was reading from her book, We Are the Young Magicians.
Hmm.
And I could grab it off my shelf, but there's a poem in there about this young Black woman who's wearing this Raiders jacket.
Hmm.
And it's just, I just really was drawn to it and felt like it spoke to me. But there's so many good poems in that book. And I think I stood there and stayed there until she was finished reading. And I think I walked up to her and just said hello and thank you. And then some many years down the line, I would end up doing my MFA at Antioch's Low Residency,
Wow.
and Ruth Foreman was one of my professors there. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that's really getting called, there I feel like I've got a lot in common with your story because also I wanted to be an actor. I was raised in like the middle of nowhere, California, where it was like, well, what jobs are there? Well, all I do all day is pet cows and watch TV, and I'm not going to be a dairy farmer, so I guess I want to be an actress because those were the only two jobs I knew existed. And you know how they say like if you want to be an actor or whatever, it's like that's got to be the only thing you want, and you want that more than anything else in the world. Well, I drive up to like UC, Upright Citizens Brigade in Hollywood, and I'd get there early so I could go to my favorite coffee shop and work on poems on my way. And I think that should have clued me in. No, there were other things I wanted to do more. And writing poetry was, usually a lot easier and cheaper than taking classes at UCB and everything like that. Um, and like you also, I felt like in high school reading all of the older poets, it wasn't for me. It wasn't until I got to the end of my senior year of college and I had that big anthology of like, all the great poets you should know from the 1800s. And wasn't digging it. But then I flipped to the back where it was like the new poets. And I found a poem by Avon Voland, who's a contemporary. And I was like, oh, this is the language I use every day. And that can be poetry.
Right.
I mean, so there's something I really appreciate it when schools teach modern literature first and then go excavate the layers to see where it came from and not the other way around, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, which I know you teach and you're teaching at the college level, yeah?
I am. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so do you have do you have a way of getting younger people interested in poetry? Do you start with with the contemporary poets or what do you do to try to get kids interested?
Yeah. So I have to say, I've been really fortunate in that at F&M and at the other places where I've taught, students come in with a strong interest in creative writing and in poetry specifically.
Hmm.
So that's not been a problem. But when I'm teaching, say, students in an intro to creative writing class, I often, or my intermediate poetry writing class, what I do is I'll teach a contemporary poem and one that has perhaps a similar subject matter. I'll teach one that is more canonical, right? And older.
Hmm.
And then we can have a conversation about how the two are in conversation with one another. So that's what
Okay,
I
awesome.
typically do. Maybe I'm teaching, a Robert Hayden poem along with a Terrence Hayes poem, right? And
Hmm.
talk about, the form and how these two poems that might be talking about fatherhood or fathers are in conversation with one another.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you for doing that. I think that's a more effective way of getting people into it. I really wish I really wish they had done that in my high school, but we go on, we become teachers. We gotta do it the way we want to do it. So I guess that's part of how it works. I'm really curious, are you one who feels comfortable teaching your own poetry, or do you try to shy away from using your own work as an example?
Once in a while, I know that's frowned upon, and so I never want students to feel like I'm pushing my work on them.
Hmm.
But there have been times, and actually, like I've taught Bird in conversation with other poems when I'm trying to talk about like the braided poem and weaving in
Hmm.
different things. But generally, I don't teach my own work once in a while, just once in a while. I will talk to a student one-on-one, and if they're looking for examples of something that I've done, I can say, here are some examples that others have written. You can check out my work as well, but I kind of leave it at that.
Sort of that little breadcrumb, like, mine's the recommended reading, but it's not the official thing I'm gonna grade you on. That seems eminently fair of you. I part of the reason I was asking is I was thinking your poem that you just read was I could see where it could be opening up a conversation about guns, about gun culture, about gun violence. Obviously, people have very strong feelings either way.
Yeah.
And in that poem, you're not vilifying anything. We could say it's a political poem, but I don't think you're coming down hard or obvious about any political agenda with it. Um, and I'm curious for you, did you have a particular goal in starting to write the poem about making a point, or is that something you try not to know where you're going with the writing?
With this poem, I didn't know where I was going. I knew that I was writing about the cache of guns that I had seen.
Mm.
Um, I knew that I kind of thought in looking at my relative, he kind of felt like he's a good looking guy, and he kind of felt like this kind of Hollywood actor type. Um, and so I was just kind of merging those two things together. I was also thinking about how I grew up, and I was always watching these cartoons that, if you think about it, were pretty violent. And so, how can I connect those things together? The way it ends with that, the window facing West frames an ever red sky, there is no kind of answer. It really leaves it up to the reader.
Yeah.
But I would say that there are other poems in the book that are more pointed,
Hmm.
uh, and are much more making a kind of argument or leaning more stronger in a direction for sure, even though I might not be saying it. Perhaps I'm using documentary language to allow that source text to say it for me.
Hmm.
Yeah, there are other poems that kind of do that work.
I don't want to butcher the language or misquote it, but you have a line in there about like if this was a movie, he would
Mm,
be this kind of character. Would you read that part again?
sure. Were this a cowboy picture, he'd be the man to save the day. Guns in hands, a backdrop of women, some he's loved, others waiting, fighting for attention.
Yeah, I mean, this is in um set the poem is set in Hollywood, right? Or I mean, the book is has got the title of Hollywood. So obviously we've got that in the background thematically. But was
Right.
the
Yeah, this poem is set in Texas.
got it. Okay. Um yeah, that's why I was thinking Hollywood though, because the book is referencing Hollywood and obviously the
Right.
poem is referencing Hollywood too. And I was just thinking about that having, lived in LA so long. It's like you think of LA as just the movies, but there's all this other stuff that goes on there. And people own guns. And I was just like watching, what did I just go see? One battle after another. And it's like, how many movies have guns in them? Oh, it's just like everywhere. It's so ubiquitous.
Right.
And yeah, I just really appreciate turning the lens on or making that comparison, I guess, between how we view gun culture and you know how that kind of bleeds over into the reality
Mm,
um, of how people own guns. Um, yeah, and I really appreciate how it ends on just this ever red sky, like that kind of hints that it's uh like I said, ubiquitous and everywhere. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I chose this one to read because it is making definitely it's interrogating our use of guns. But I also kind of read this today because Hollywood, as you mentioned, is prominent. Um,
Hmm.
and I've been thinking so much about where we're at today in this current moment, and the ways in which we could talk about the politics being theatrical and movie like, and that was just a metaphor at the time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
now, what we're actually seeing in real time is the ways in which um, not Hollywood per se, but like the entertainment industry has intersected with our politics, literally.
Hmm.
And people in the entertainment industry have now become um, the people that we are relying on for political leadership and for political guidance. And that is scary. It's absolutely scary. And so it's guns, but it's more than just guns. It's the ways in which Hollywood, literally, the entertainment industry, is seeping into our political culture and
Yeah.
or has and the violence that that is doing as well.
Yeah. I can't remember who said this. I think it was someone on a late night talk show was like Washington DC. There's Washington DC and then there's Hollywood and both of them are groups that think they have all the power in America and one of them actually does. And the person was not clear about which one actually
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
And now I'm not even sure there's that much of a difference. But they also made the point like, Hollywood or DC is like where you go if you want to be in Hollywood, but you're not good looking enough. you know? So I'm
Okay.
like, that is a little, they are all just showmen. They are all just showmen. And who has more influence is it's something I think we're seeing right now, like especially after like, you know, the battle over free speech and Jimmy Kimmel. It's like there are different ways of wielding that kind of power, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I want to move on to the other poem, to Bird. So if you've got that one at the ready, please give that one a read.
Okay. Bird. Yesterday at Shepherd and Gray, the parking lot was filled with birds. Blackbirds, actually grackles. It was a grackle lot. Instead of a bumper on a car, there were 10 grackles. Instead of a sunroof, 50 grackles sat high, their bodies shimmers under cheap strip mall lights as shoppers delayed their spending to pull out phones and take shots. Such spectators we were. Like that summer in July when I was left again to wonder who was the child and who the adult. That Sunday evening that hung in the air like bug spray, when my father, the one who fed me and gave me his last name, stood 2 stories on our family porch, every neighbor in all manner of dress drawn from their homes in the street watching. Let me tell you how he spread his arms wide like the man he was before Vietnam or before the schizophrenia. Let me tell you how a child learns the alphabet by counting, how she learns only 2 letters separate the words hero and heroine, how he stood high on the ledge of a porch the child never much liked because there was a crack in its wooden center, as if the world was waiting to open its jaws to swallow her body whole. Let me tell you how that July evening didn't hold death, but instead was the preface to death. The point being, he jumped. Some will say there are worse songs to sing, others might believe it a tragedy. But who are we to question the gods when a man unconcerned with the inconvenience of his presence shows up in a parking lot winged as an army of himself? Eventually, lights went dark in the shops, and each watcher retraced their steps back home to find their families, to rejoice over food, to laugh and settle the night. And the birds, steadfast they stood, not quite ready for flight.
Oh, wow. That's one where I've heard it a couple of times and I'm still like noticing new things about it, hearing you read it. What fascinates me about that poem, Nikki, and why I wanted to discuss it is it's so layered. It's like parking lot, grackles, father, the father's history, and there's a lot that's said and not said, and then we come back to the parking lot and the grackles and the metaphor, and I feel like kind of everything is sort of insinuated without being stated outright. So yeah, I'll just ask, you know, tell me a little bit about how this poem got kicked off.
Oh, there are a couple of reasons. My mentor, Tony Hoagland, the late Tony Hoagland, was not happy with me actually. I had been sharing some poems with him, and I think he thought they were a bit too experimental, maybe. And he said something like, and they were very, they probably included source text. They were very didactic, and um, and I remember him saying something like, "Oh, you should have been a playwright." When and I took that as, "Oh, you know." you're not writing really poetry really well right now.
Hmm.
And so I got really angry at his comment. And so I left. I was visiting with him and I left I was really angry. And I went home and I was like, I'll show you. And so I'm like, okay, what do I write? And I was like, okay, I realized that I hadn't written a poem ever about my father, Brett Hurd, who had adopted me when he married my mother. And and so I thought, okay, let's see, let's write a poem about about Brett Hurd. Um and there was also this experience that I had I write phrases, and I write things that kind of stick out to me on the back of receipts or I don't really like keep a book of things, but whatever sheet of paper is nearby, I'll write on it, and then I'll make sure it's somewhere where I can go to it.
Mhm.
And so on a little sheet of paper, I had something about the grackles. The grackles there's so many grackles in Houston. They're everywhere and they're kind of scary. And I had this experience where I was shopping for my niece and nephew. It's almost Christmas. And I walk out of the store and there's grackles everywhere. And it was kind of like something out of a Hitchcock film. And so I thought, okay, do something different. I had been reading some Ross Gay poems, and I was really mesmerized by his poem, The Lion and the Gazelle. And I'm like, okay, you should try to write a woven poem that's not something that I typically do. Um,
Mhm.
and so let's take this experience that you had at the shopping center with the grackles and see how you can connect it with your father. And maybe, what is it about your father that stands out to you? Well, he did jump off the porch. I did witness that. And so let's kind of figure out how these two can connect. And of course, that was me going in not knowing at all what the poem I didn't know how they connected, so I just had to work through it, through the writing, and this is what came out of that. And then I wrote the poem pretty quickly and sent it, sent it in a card to Tony. Um, so yeah, that was my like little revenge poem.
I love this story so much. I rarely have heard anyone tell me that they wrote something out of revenge, or to prove a point to a teacher. Like in poetry salon workshops that I teach, I'm always talking about, let go of the product and don't worry about your audience and, write like no one's looking and stuff like that. But every once in a while, you really can just get some heat by writing to someone else to say, hey, I'm going to show you what I can do. And certainly that poem really, really brings the heat. And yeah, I can see now how the grackles are just like this container, for the other story. But I don't think it wouldn't be the same poem, if you didn't have them. And then at the end, they're kind of like together in that metaphor, of the birds not being ready for flight. Like that's so cool. That's so cool. Um, that reminds me of one of the early poetry exercises I got, and I don't remember from whom, but it was like that. Take one thing, take another thing. Now you have to find how the two are related, and you have to take one and make it a metaphor for the other, and your brain has to think about how to do that, and that's where that tension comes from. So yeah, hey, poetry saloncast listeners, the only reason we do this is to get ideas for our own writing. So, that is a really great prompt or editing prompt to get something out of left field and make it work for the poem. Um, yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah, there had to be at least three elements. There was the experience with my father. there are the grackles, and then there had to be something that wasn't an experience. There had to be some kind of meditation on how
Yeah.
these two are put together. And I didn't know, I didn't know how this was going to end at all. And that
Mhm.
was, so there was a lot of just thinking and meditating on, reflecting on how that was, how these two things were connecting and what could I say about it. So I'm really grateful. I mean, I should say, Tony was a dear mentor,
Mhm.
and probably the one of the best poetry professors that I've ever had. So I'm grateful that he said what he said. Um,
Yeah.
this is what came out of it, and it really pushed me. So yeah.
I met Tony Hoagland like once in Oakland or somewhere in the Bay Area when I was a new poet and tried to write about that experience because it was like one of the first time I'd ever been to a poetry reading with like a big wig poet and everything. And uh yeah, he left quite an impression, although I've never gotten to study with him. I've known a few other people who did, and it sounds like he was a great mentor. Um, yeah, so that's great that I assume it met his approval.
Yes.
Did he still keep saying you should be a playwright after
No,
that,
he
or
never
did
said
that?
that ever again. He never said that ever again.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. And was your father still living when you wrote this? Were you able to show it to him?
No, no. My father actually died when I was 8. So yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. And you said you hadn't written about him before.
Yeah, and I don't think that there was a particular reason as to why. I think that
Mm-hmm.
there were other familial poems that were much more urgent and in the forefront that involved other relatives. And I had probably, been reading some poems about poets writing about their fathers. I think I mentioned the Terrence Hayes poem, and I don't remember the name of it, but it's the last poem in Hip Logic that I really love going to. And he talks about his father, um, who was not like his biological father.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Bret Hurt wasn't my biological father, but he was the father that I knew.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, well, this would be a challenge. You haven't written about your father, and so maybe you should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you written any other poems about him?
No, he's featured in a poem in my first book that's really about my mother. But I haven't written any other poems, and maybe I will, but I'm really trying to focus right now on writing essays,
Mm-hmm.
which is just a whole another beast. And so, but maybe down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we all have our topic, our curriculum. And I know when I was an earlier poet, I felt like everyone was writing about their family, and I just didn't feel called to it. Um, at the time, I think it's because I was just like I was young and I was so needing to create my own life and world outside of them. And then I got married and had a couple poems published, and I was like, okay, I know who I am now. Now I can, from the safety of this little cocoon, look back on all that other stuff, but I didn't want to until then.
Right.
So yeah, it comes in its own time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious about the essays. Are they all on a particular topic or what's driving that?
You know, at least what I keep saying is that I'm writing about silence, and I'm writing about the different ways that silence has articulated itself in my life. Being a female daughter in silence and notions of silence. Um, I had a mini stroke some years ago, and so I suffer from aphasia, which I mentioned to you like before we
Hmm.
began this. And so there's there's this thing where, I do this thing where I'm working with words and I teach and I'm working with, what memory, and the aphasia just kind of makes that challenging at times.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm writing about my brother, and there's not a lot that I can say about that, but yeah, my brother and silence, and I'm thinking about how those things all kind of connect. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, silence, you know, that's a rich topic. Um, is it too early to ask what what have you discovered about silence as you're writing about it? Give me the elevator pitch for this collection of essays.
Mm. I think that I've spent a good portion of my life thinking that you have to speak up
Hmm.
and that speaking up was going to change things.
Mm,
And from my vantage point now, I'm not sure that I agree with that so much.
mm,
And it's not that I think people shouldn't speak up and speak truth to power, and talk about um, and speak out when there have been grave injustices. I'm not saying that at all.
yeah.
But I think that I was naive in thinking that it would make a difference. And so much of what I see right now is that you can speak out, but there are costs, and it very well might not make a difference. And so I think that's where I'm at right now, and just trying to think about that.
That is really fascinating. The first thing that popped into my mind, I think this is a Zora Neale Hurston quote, is that you have to speak up or else they'll kill you and say you liked it. That's Zora Neale Hurston. That might
Um,
be
and I've heard that quote, and here I am having an aphasia moment. I feel like going to my phone and looking it up right now. I know that quote.
I know, right? And I sorry to put you on the spot. I do this all the time where I know a quote and I don't know who said it, and I'm the worst about giving an attribution. I promise I'm not the one who said it. I'm not trying to take credit. I just don't know who did say it. But I was having this conversation with Tim Siebels on the Poetry
Mhm.
Saloncast a few
I
weeks
love Tim.
ago. Yeah, he's something. He is something else, and I'm very grateful I got a interview with him. But um, yeah, I mean, I won't put words in his mouth, but I mean, hey, listeners, go down the rabbit hole, check out that interview, hear what Tim has to say on the subject, because I mean, right now, especially, this has been a driving force for me as an artist. When I was younger, I was thinking like, there's these writers who speak out, and yet it doesn't seem to have fixed anything. And for a while, I didn't feel like I should focus on writing or the arts for a long time because I was just like, well, I should, be a revolutionary or go into politics or do something that's really going to force change. But I don't know that anyone's being super effective, or I don't know, things change for the better for some people for a period of time, and then it gets worse for another group of people later, or, you know, it it's very complicated, but I haven't seen anyone who just pressed the button or found the right combination of words to fix it all yet.
It's what seems important, and I'm just saying this at the moment because as I try to write through this, maybe I'll think differently. But I'm thinking that at the very least, it's important for, people in the future to know that there were people who cared and spoke out.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Yeah.
Because those are the voices that have shaped, you know, my mindset and my thinking. And so if for nothing else, to have an archive of voices that exist to say we spoke out, then
Mm.
that that is important in and of itself.
Yeah. Um, I came with questions about poetry, but now I'm really fascinated with the topic of silence on this podcast where we are talking. Uh I'm also curious if you're would it be right to say that you're doing research into this, or are you doing research? Are you doing a lot of personal meditation and thinking? What's influencing, what's guiding and influencing?
I'm doing some reading, but I think much of it is reflection. And
Hmm.
again, this is so much of what I'm writing is experience, but I want some of this also to be documentary in nature and some to some extent where I'm bringing other voices in
Mm.
to talk about their experience as well. And so where those voices, where exactly all those voices will come from, I'm not quite sure yet,
Hmm.
but working on that for, yeah, for sure.
You know, I got to interview the poet Joseph Fasano a couple months ago. It was winter. Now it's still pretty warm out. I think. Anyways, he didn't say this on the podcast, but he said this later that there's like two kinds of prayer, and one is speaking to
Mm.
the Almighty, and then the other is listening. And there's some very Latinate terms that I don't remember. I don't remember what what the Latinate terms are for these two different kinds of prayers. But is some of the silence about listening, or some spiritual qualities? Because obviously, like meditation, prayer, that's part of what comes to my mind when I think about silence.
I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about until you just mentioned it now, the ways in which meditation, I don't have a consistent practice, but meditation has always been the thing to ground me.
Mm.
I remember as a little kid just wanting to go in a space and be by myself and just be quiet.
Mhm.
And that's how I am as an adult. And I hadn't thought about that. And so maybe, thank you for that idea, Tresha. Like, maybe that has a place in thinking about meditation and
Yeah.
uh, the kind of usefulness of silence. I like that because silence is not a negative thing at all. It's a positive thing. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that silence is one of those fascinating things. I think this about fire too is like,
Mm.
fire burns you, but it also warms you. It can destroy something, but it also like helps you create things. I guess silence is the same thing where it's all about context. Silence can be, oh, it's so great. We're sitting here in this comfortable silence, and the silence of the woods, or my internal silence versus, the sound of silence, very darkness, my old friend kind of silence. So
Right.
yeah, there's no end to the fascination with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I can't wait to read this book. Um, you can probably tell I'm not a person who spends a lot of time cultivating silence. I find it accidentally between breaths of noise, but I have things to learn clearly.
Whatever works for you, though, right?
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah, it'll come in its time, when it's the right time for me to sit down and listen to more silence, I'll do it, but I'll wait for that time. Um, Niki, thank you so much for being here. I usually ask about like books you're reading and who is influencing you, but I think you've given us some great names already. Is there anyone else you want to send us to the bookshelves to go find? Um, as I said, I don't know all the poets, and one of the way I get to know them is to get the recommendations from the poets I interview.
Well, right this moment, I'm reading. I do know some things by Richard Sykin, and they're all prose poems. They're
Mm.
really, really great. And I'm going to turn around here and another book that since we're speaking about this is a workshop of silence, which is I'm not gonna, this is Jean de Marique. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it was translated from the French by Connor Bracken. And this is another book that I'm really, really loving, Workshop of Silence. So, yes.
Is that a book of poems?
It is a book of poems in translation. Yes. Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Workshop of Silence. I'll take that one out to the woods with me to read. Um, oh, and I would be really remiss if I didn't ask. I don't remember if I said it in your bio, but the publishers of your books that you have mentioned, um, did I mention that in your bio? Give us your publishers one more time.
Yeah. So, The Language of Shedding Skin was published by Main Street Rag. Don't You Weep. Here I go. Sting and Honey Press, and then The Stuff of Hollywood by Copper Canyon Press.
Oh my God. Well, Copper Canyon, there you go. I'm kind of a sucker for anything that mentions Hollywood because, I think that I'm interested in writing about it. I wasn't interested in being on the silver screen. I'm really interested still in like the vibe of that whole area, and I always will be. So, yeah, thank you for giving me more reading on more interesting subjects, and thank you again for being here. I don't know when our paths will cross again, but I certainly hope I get to see you again in the future.
Sure, they will, Tresha. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you when the podcast is up and live.
All
So,
right. Thank you.
all right. Talk to you
Take
again soon
care.
someday.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.